All right, everybody. I've been mulling in my head since Address the Sess last week when we had a really interesting kind of theoretical discussion. It started to play off this concept that's reemerged called Ludonarrative Dissonance. It was coined by Clint Hawking, who was once at LucasArts and then at Ubisoft, to kind of deal with the original BioShock and the sense that the way the game played and its sense of selflessness versus what the ideas of the story were, which were about selfishness, that there was a dissonance between the two of them. This has kind of reemerged recently, especially with BioShock Infinite. It's been used in many ways with regard to the amount of violence that's in the game that somehow doesn't link up with what's happening in the story. The same has been said about Tomb Raider, and you can see this going back to games that have really strong narrative and characters, like the Uncharted series, that seem to be a little bit at odds at the homicidal rate of death that happens in the course of it. I don't want to address that term specifically, but it really had got me to thinking about sort of the sense of violence in games, how many games use violence as kind of its core mechanic, not so much as core storytelling. And you know, there's been a lot of complaints lately, like especially coming out of the indie game sector. I'm not saying that they are right or wrong. I think they're valid things to be put into the mix. But I wanted to think more about sort of why and how we've allowed that to be such the central motif of interactivity that happens in games. And because we had the theoretical discussion, I kind of was embarrassed I didn't bring this up during Address the Sess, but there's a concept out there called Historicism, and it's the idea of doing interpretation, specifically as I've learned it, to literature, that puts it inside of a historical context or a geographical context or a cultural context, and that there's very specific meaning tied to those particular confines under which the work was created. And it becomes very interesting when you sort of take what's happened there and apply it to video games. Now, one of the most fascinating things I learned when I was in college, I had the pleasure of studying under a professor named Lisa Jardine, who is definitely one of the top people in that field. And I grew up with probably one of the fathers of historicism, Stephen Greenblatt, who is one of the greatest Shakespearean scholars alive today. What I learned back then was you can look at the plays of Shakespeare's time as having a business imperative. You know, they were in an economic environment. There were certain people, there were patrons that were funding it, and they were expecting a certain level of success, and they had to find some way to reach that audience. And plays were not the only form of entertainment at that time. The Globe Theatre, where Shakespeare's plays were performed, also indulged in other types of activities, most notably blood sports. Apparently it was really, really popular to bring in a bear and a dog and have the two fight. As you can possibly imagine, it was gory. And that was incredibly popular. And so there was kind of a need to find a way to have entertainment that was fictional that could somehow convince someone who loves seeing bears take apart dogs go to the theater. And that's why you end up with works like Titus Andronicus, like Macbeth. They used to have buckets of pig's blood that they would just throw on the actors on the stage to really play up the more lurid and sordid aspects of the story. Now, of course, there were also comedies that were filled with sexual innuendo, those kind of things that brought in the rabble, because that really was the audience for these plays. It wasn't as high-minded as we present these plays today. And it's with that in mind that I think we look at the role of violence, be it shooting, be it swords, or that type of content that we see in so many games. It is a commercial means to meet the audience. And when you do consider how much money is being put into these games, we've kind of established a sort of a form over time. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. It's something that I like to call artistry, not art. When you have these business parameters that you have to negotiate and you have to navigate, but you still want to create something that is a work of art, that process, which I find so fascinating, is really one of the most admirable aspects of what you see in game development. I think it's fair to argue about whether or not we have too much violent content in our games today, or that we've really kind of resting on our laurels of something that has proven successful year over year over year. But you could also look at it in the terms of tradition. That, you know, as Ken Levine kind of said about BioShock Infinite, look at it like a musical, where it doesn't really make sense why people break into song all of a sudden because they were just, they were just talking right before that, that the idea that you have story that breaks up into this kind of gameplay mechanic that is violent is a part of tradition, just like the 5-act structure of a Shakespearean play, or the way that you put together an Italian or an English sonnet. That we have this tradition that we work with and we work within, and it slowly changes over time. Now, one of the more interesting things I have always thought about all the plays, we read a lot of the Shakespeare's plays weren't necessarily that popular. In fact, some of the most popular plays of Shakespeare are almost head-scratchingly indecipherable today. Pericles was the most popular play he had, and because they've lost probably the original language, no one can figure out why it was so good. Now, the most popular play of that era was the Spanish tragedy. There's nothing really remarkable about the language. There really isn't all that much poetry to be found in it. It's read really as a historical document, but it is one where a man cuts off his tongue and probably 20 people are lying dead on the stage by the end. So when we look at something being wrong with our society today and our interest and our fascination with violence, it actually has a tradition of stuff that we study in our best universities. Okay, our question of this week comes from IronBat92. He's a bat made of iron, so he can be melted down and reconstituted into things other than a bat. Maybe a sheep, Iron Sheep 92. Anyway, dear Adam, since Mass Effect 3's ending, the phrase, quote, gamer entitlement has been thrown around whenever there's an issue that good amounts of people love to throw around when they don't agree on an issue. For example, when Overstrike was changed to Fuse, people who get annoyed with people who keep complaining about the changes, people say, oh, just stop being an over-entitled gamer, like it's an insult or something. What are your thoughts on this recent trend? Do you think we're becoming over-entitled? Thank you very much, Mr. Iron Bat. The entitlement thing, I've said this term, it is definitely, if not meant as an insult, it's meant to be somewhat belittling, to try to take some of the venom that seems to come out of these large, kind of riotous behaviors that happen online when something happens with a game company or a game developer or within a game itself that looks like there's this angry mob of everyone that wants to see changes or feels that they're owed something and they weren't delivered it. If it wasn't Mass Effect 3's ending, I remember when Left 4 Dead 2 was first announced, the Left 4 Dead community was absolutely furious about it. I've said many things that tend to be quite contentious to those communities when they happen, but rather than me being all cranky pants and trying to piss you all off, I think what I've learned over time, and especially since being here at Rev 3, is that the internet is very, very deceptive. When a lot of people are saying something in all caps at one time, you tend to assume that if it's that loud, there must be a lot of people doing it. The thing is, I don't know. There's no way to really figure that out. And I would say to you guys out there that do tend to participate so heavily and have very, very strong feelings and find yourself with like-minded people, I kind of call it the focus group of one phenomena. That when you surround yourself, even on the internet, as diverse as it is, with a community of people who are of like minds, you tend to make a false extrapolation that everybody is thinking that way. I cannot tell you how many questions I get in a given week that are predicated on something that is fundamentally not proven out by fact. That's where things start to go a little bit awry. In addition, we look at everyone as a gamer. I even fall victim to that. And so when people are complaining about Mass Effect 3 and people were complaining about Left 4 Dead 2, you think it's all the same people. In fact, I am assuming there was very little crossover between those groups. It's communities for the specific product at a specific time, but it all just comes out as this anonymous cacophony of complaint, of frustration, and it tends to be worded in ways that aren't terribly sophisticated. That doesn't really do a lot to make the gaming community as a whole look like they're responsible adults. You see the same thing, in other areas that you can go to on Reddit or other parts of the internet, but it does tend to stand out most and the loudest when it comes out of the gaming community. And what I said before, and I say it again, I also don't think that those who post, those who complain, those who say that are part of a majority. I think it's a very, very loud minority. We don't really know what the part and the whole and what the relation is in all of this, and so I guess we all just rest on the term entitlement. Also, when you are asking questions, because I love answering these questions, take a gander at the other stuff we've been doing on SESSLER'S something. I'm seeing a lot of stuff that has already been addressed in previous episodes. One more thing I just wanted to highlight for you. We're going to have a new Spoiled Games this week. It is Tomb Raider, and just to get you excited, we're going to have a new show debuting in 2 weeks. It is Max Scoville's new show. It's a one-man show called Extra Credit. It's him explaining all the things that happen outside of a game that can bring more value to your game playing experience.